What would you do if the person you loved most, the one who was supposed to be by your side forever, walked away when you needed them the most? Imagine being left behind while carrying their child, feeling betrayed, lost, and completely alone. But what if, years later, after everything seemed impossible, they showed up with a final chance to make things right? What happened next will leave you speechless. John had always thought he had everything: a stable job, a beautiful wife named Sarah, and a baby on the way. His life was a dream he had worked hard to build, but somewhere along the way, everything began to crumble. It wasn't sudden, but rather a slow unraveling. The cracks started to show when Sarah began to gain weight from her pregnancy, and John found himself distracted by someone else. Her name was Emily, a younger woman with bright eyes and a smile that made him feel alive in ways he hadn't felt in years. At first it was just innocent flirting. But then, one day, it turned into something more, something that made John feel guilty but also, strangely, liberated. He tried to tell himself that he still loved Sarah, but the more time he spent with Emily, the more he realized he couldn't stop. He began justifying his actions, convincing himself that he was doing it for his own happiness, that Sarah would understand eventually. But she didn't. She found out about Emily. The confrontation was nothing like he imagined. Sarah was calm, almost too calm. She asked him to leave. The baby was only a few months from being born, and here John was, standing at the door, watching his entire world shatter. He didn't even ask Sarah to reconsider. He just walked out, his heart torn in two, but his mind focused on the life he could have with Emily. Months passed, and life with Emily wasn't what John had expected. Sure, she was younger, but the spark he felt in the beginning had already started to fade. The late-night talks, the spontaneous trips, everything became routine, and somewhere deep inside, John started to realize what he had given up. The memories of Sarah's warm smile and their life together haunted him, but he buried those thoughts. He couldn't go back. His pride wouldn't let him. Besides, Emily was the one he chose now. Meanwhile, Sarah had to move on without him. The pregnancy wasn't easy, but Sarah found a way to make it through. She moved into a small apartment, raised their son, and rebuilt her life. Every now and then, John would hear about her progress through mutual friends. He'd hear how well she was doing, how their son was growing strong and healthy, and it ate at him. He told himself it was for the best. He convinced himself that he made the right choice. But deep down, he knew the truth. He missed her. He missed his old life. But he couldn't turn back now. Then one day, John received a letter from Sarah. It was unexpected, and for a brief moment, he hesitated before opening it. Inside was a note, simple but clear. "I've left you something. I hope you find peace." John was confused. What could she possibly be leaving for him? The last time they spoke, it was over. There was no reconciliation. But something in the way she wrote that note made him curious. He needed to know what she meant. So he decided to go to the apartment she had once lived in, unsure of what he would find. When he arrived, the place was quiet. It felt strange being back there, almost like a ghost of his past was lingering in the air. Sarah had moved out a few months before. The apartment was now rented to someone else. John walked through the door as if it were his home, the memories crashing down on him. It was in the back corner of the living room, under a pile of old books, that he found it, a small, wooden box. There was no label, no indication of what was inside, just the faint scent of lavender, something he hadn't smelled in so long. He hesitated for a moment, then opened it. Inside the box, John found a few things that took him by surprise. First, there was a letter, written in Sarah's handwriting. It wasn't long, but it was heartfelt. She talked about the pain she felt after he left, how she struggled to understand why he made the decision he did, but how she eventually forgave him. There was a small piece of jewelry, a necklace they had bought together when they were first dating. It was tarnished, but still beautiful. And then There was a photo of their son, one that John had never seen before. It was a picture of Sarah holding their baby in the hospital, smiling at the camera with tears in her eyes. John could see the love in her face, but also the exhaustion. She had been through so much, and all of it was without him. But the most surprising thing in the box was a letter addressed to him from Sarah. The words were raw and full of pain, but also filled with something else, understanding. I hope one day you realize what you've lost. I don't want your regret. I don't want your apology. I want you to remember what we had, and to never forget the family you abandoned. I'm moving on, and so should you. This is my final gift to you, John. It's not forgiveness. It's the truth. The letter felt like a punch to the gut. He had left her when she was at her most vulnerable, and now, years later, this was her final act. John sat down, the weight of the letter heavy in his hands. It was as if time had stopped. He had expected anger, bitterness, but instead, Sarah had given him this final act of grace, a reminder of everything he had lost. Her forgiveness wasn't something he could easily accept. It was too much. He didn't deserve it. He stared at the picture of their son. The boy was growing up without him. He had chosen Emily, and now it felt like he had chosen wrong. The next few days were a blur for John. He couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's final gift, and the weight of her words haunted him. He tried to reach out to Emily, but their relationship felt hollow now. It wasn't what he thought it would be. The passion was gone, replaced by emptiness. He had tried to build a new life, but it was never going to replace the one he lost. As he sat in his car thinking about everything, he knew there was only one thing he needed to do. John decided to visit Sarah's grave. He had never been there, thinking it was too painful to face, but he knew now it was time. When he stood in front of the gravestone, he felt a wave of regret crash over him. He didn't know what he was expecting, but it felt like closure, an understanding that no matter how much time passed, the consequences of his actions would never go away. He knelt down and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'll never be the man you wanted me to be, but I'll carry this with me for the rest of my life." It was then, as he stood there, that he noticed something strange. There, at the base of the gravestone, was another small box. John's heart skipped a beat. What could this be? As he opened it, he found a small envelope with his name on it. Inside was a final letter from Sarah, one last gift. It was a letter that made John's heart stop. It was addressed to him, but it was dated years ago. In it, Sarah wrote about her last thoughts before she passed away, her love for their son, and how she had never stopped caring about him. The letter didn't contain any bitterness, just a quiet acceptance. John's hands trembled as he read the final words. "Even though you weren't there when I needed you, I never stopped loving you. I hope one day you'll realize that it's not too late to make things right. For our son and for yourself." John closed the letter and sat in the cemetery, the weight of his past decisions crushing him. He understood now. Sarah's final gift wasn't just a reminder of what he had lost. It was a chance, a glimmer of hope for redemption. He knew it wouldn't be easy, and it might take years, but he had a chance to start over. This was his moment to make things right, not just for Sarah, but for their son, too. And for the first time in a long time, John felt like he had a purpose again. The days after the discovery of the second letter were a whirlwind for John. He couldn't stop replaying the words Sarah had written. Each sentence felt like it was carved into his mind. "I never stopped loving you." Those words haunted him in the quiet moments when he tried to sleep, and even during the busy days when he tried to distract himself with work and life with Emily. He had always thought that if he had just been brave enough to stay with Sarah, everything would have been different. But now he realized that wasn't true. Even if he had stayed, he would have found some way to disappoint her. The truth was, he had abandoned her when she needed him the most. Emily, as understanding as she tried to be, began to notice John's behavior changing. The late-night thoughts, the long silences, the way he'd sometimes stare off into space as if he was somewhere else. She asked him what was wrong, but he never truly gave her an answer. How could he explain to her that the love he once felt for her was now overshadowed by regret for Sarah? He couldn't, and so he withdrew further, leaving Emily feeling more alone than she had ever been. She began to pull away, sensing the distance between them, but John couldn't bring himself to reach out and close that gap. Weeks passed, and John found himself thinking more and more about his son. He had seen pictures of him through mutual friends, watched his little boy grow in front of his eyes from a distance. He wondered what it would be like to be a part of his life. The guilt of not being there weighed heavily on him. What kind of man was he to leave his family when they needed him the most? He wondered if he could still make a difference in his son's life, if his son would even want to know him. And most of all, John couldn't shake the feeling that he had wasted precious time. Time that could have been spent with Sarah, with their son, building a life that was never meant to be. One evening, while sitting alone in his apartment, John felt an overwhelming urge to see his son. He had no idea where to start, but he knew one thing: he had to try. He had to make things right, even if it meant facing the consequences of his past mistakes. With a deep breath, John picked up his phone and dialed the number he had avoided for months, Sarah's. His heart raced as the phone rang, each second stretching longer than the last. When she finally answered, there was a brief moment of silence before Sarah spoke. Her voice was calm, but there was a noticeable distance between them. It had been so long since they'd spoken, and the weight of their past hovered between them. "Hello?" she asked, her tone guarded but not cold. "Hi, Sarah," John said, his voice shaking slightly. "It's me, John." For a moment, Sarah didn't respond. Then, in a voice that was much softer than he expected, she said, "I know who it is. What do you want?" John hesitated, unsure of what to say. It had been so long, and now that he was finally speaking to her, the words didn't seem to come easily. I need to see him, our son," he said quietly. There was a long pause. John could hear Sarah taking a breath, probably considering his request. Then she finally spoke again, her words careful but resolute. "He's happy, John. He's growing up without you, but he's fine. I've kept my promise to him, and I've raised him the best way I know how." John's heart sank. "I know I've messed up, but I want to be there for him now. I want to make things right for him, for you, for us." Sarah was quiet for a while. John waited, hoping for something, anything. Finally she spoke, her voice heavy with emotion, but firm. "I can't promise anything. I don't know if it's fair to him to let you back in. You left us when we needed you. It's not that easy." John felt the sting of her words, but he knew she was right. There was no simple way back. He had to prove to her and to himself that he could be the father and the man he should have been all along. "I understand," he said softly. "I just want a chance. I don't know how to fix everything, but I'll start by being there for him. I need to try, Sarah." There was another silence, and then Sarah sighed. "I'll think about it. I'll let you know when the time is right." John's heart raced as he ended the call. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't run away from this anymore. This wasn't just about his past mistakes. It was about his future, the future of the son he had left behind, and the chance to rebuild a family he had once broken. The next few days were a blur of emotions. John couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's words. He had thought that his life with Emily would be his fresh start, but in reality, he had only been running from the truth. Now, as he sat in his apartment, staring at the phone, he realized he had to face his past. He couldn't undo the hurt he had caused, but he could at least make an effort to rebuild what he had lost. One evening, after another silent dinner with Emily, John found himself standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. The phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Sarah. "I've been thinking about it. You can see him, but it will have to be on my terms." John's heart soared. This was his chance. He couldn't waste it. He immediately texted back, "Thank you. I won't let you down. I'll do whatever it takes." With that, a sense of relief washed over him. He had no idea where this would lead, but he finally felt like he was heading in the right direction. The following days felt like a blur for John. It was as if his whole life had been turned upside down. There was a sense of urgency in every step he took, knowing that this was his chance to make things right. He began to plan his visit to see his son, trying to prepare himself for whatever emotions would come. Every night he lay awake, thinking about how to approach it. Would his son even recognize him? Would he be angry? Would he even want him there after everything that had happened? John had been toying with the idea of calling Emily to explain everything. He owed her an explanation, but every time he picked up the phone, the words didn't seem to come. It wasn't just about telling her he was going to try and reconnect with his son. There was so much more. It felt like an admission of failure, of acknowledging that he had chosen the wrong path. But how could he explain to Emily that his past mistakes were now a weight he could no longer carry? That evening, when Emily came home from work, John finally made the decision. He sat her down, his hands shaking slightly as he looked at her. "Emily, there's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice steady but not without hesitation. Emily looked at him with concern. "What is it?" "I'm going to see my son. Sarah has agreed to let me be a part of his life. I need to do this. For him, for me." His words hung in the air between them. He waited for her response, not knowing what to expect. There was a long silence as Emily processed what he said. Her eyes softened, but there was a flicker of hurt there. "I see," she said quietly. "So what does that mean for us?" John's heart sank. "I don't know, Emily. I've been thinking about everything, about what I've done, and I can't keep running from it. I can't keep pretending like it's not there. I've made mistakes, and I have to try to fix them." Emily stood up, walking over to the window as she stared outside. "I understand," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "I just don't know if I can be part of this anymore. You need to find your way, John. But I don't think I can wait around for you to figure it out." John didn't have the words to respond. He could feel the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. She was right. She had been patient with him, understanding. But there were things he needed to work through, and he knew deep down that he had to make a choice. Emily had been a part of his life, but his son needed him now more than ever. He needed to be a father. "I don't want to hurt you," John said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I need to do this, and I don't know what that means for us." Emily didn't turn around. "I get it, John. I do. You need to do what's best for you, and I need to do what's best for me, too." John stood up, feeling the weight of the decision he had just made. He had been so focused on his own guilt and regret that he hadn't stopped to consider how much this was hurting Emily. But now wasn't the time to dwell on that. He had to focus on the task ahead, meeting his son and somehow earning back the trust he had broken so long ago. The next morning, John drove to Sarah's apartment, his heart racing. He had no idea what to expect when he arrived, but he was ready to face whatever came. When he pulled up outside the building, he saw Sarah standing on the porch, holding their son in her arms. The sight of her brought back memories of their time together, of the love they had shared. It was overwhelming, and for a moment John wasn't sure if he could go through with it. But then he saw their son, looking up at him with wide, curious eyes. Sarah nodded at him as he approached, her expression unreadable. She didn't say a word, but the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was a chance, and he had to take it. John knelt down in front of his son, trying to steady his breath as he looked into the child's eyes. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm your dad." The boy didn't respond immediately. He just stared at him, his small face a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Sarah stood a few steps away, watching the interaction quietly. John's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to think of something to say, something to bridge the gap that had existed for so long. "Do you want to play with me?" John asked, trying to keep his voice light and friendly. "I brought some toys with me. Maybe we can play together?" The boy hesitated for a moment, then nodded shyly. Sarah didn't say anything, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Perhaps hope, or maybe just cautious optimism. John couldn't tell, but he knew this was just the beginning. As he sat down on the porch with his son, playing with the toys he had brought, John felt a small flicker of joy, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He could see the boy's smile, the way he laughed at something silly John did, and for the first time in years, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could be the father his son needed. He didn't know if Sarah would ever fully forgive him, but he knew that his actions moving forward would matter more than any apology he could offer. He had a chance now, a chance to build something new with his son. Later that day, as he left Sarah's apartment, John felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. He had made a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. He didn't know what the future held, but he was determined to make it right, even if it took years. For the first time in a long while, John felt like he had a purpose again. As the weeks passed, John's life began to shift in ways he hadn't expected. The initial awkwardness of reconnecting with his son slowly turned into something more natural. Every weekend he would visit Sarah's apartment, spending time with their son. At first, their interactions were tentative, both he and the boy unsure of what their relationship should be. But as the days went by, the boy grew more comfortable, and John found himself slowly falling into the role of father. He learned how to make peanut butter sandwiches, how to play simple board games, and how to make his son laugh with just a silly face or a funny sound. Sarah watched this transformation, her eyes filled with a mixture of emotions. Part of her was relieved to see John finally taking responsibility, while another part of her remained cautious. She didn't know if she could ever fully trust him again, not after everything that had happened. Yet there was a softness in her eyes whenever she saw the two of them together, and John couldn't help but notice the way she watched him, as if there was still a piece of her heart that hadn't completely closed off to him. One evening, after a long day of playing in the park, John dropped off his son at Sarah's apartment. As he was about to leave, Sarah asked him to stay for a moment. "John, I've been thinking a lot lately," she said, her voice hesitant, "about everything, about what happened, and about where we are now." John's heart skipped a beat. Was this the moment she was finally going to lay it all out? Was she going to tell him that he couldn't be a part of their son's life anymore? He braced himself, unsure of what was to come. "I want to thank you," Sarah continued, her voice softer now, "for being here, for making the effort. It's not easy, I know, but I see you trying, and that means something, not just to me, but to him too." She glanced over at their son, who was busy coloring in the corner of the room. John nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I wish I had never left. I was selfish, and I didn't see what I had until it was too late. But I'm here now. I want to be here. For you, for him, for us, if you'll let me." Sarah's eyes softened, but there was still a guarded look in her expression. "I don't know if it's that simple, John," she said quietly. "You can't just undo the past. There's a lot of pain there, a lot of damage, and it's going to take time for me to believe in you again. But I can see you're trying. I'll give you that." John swallowed hard, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "I don't expect things to be fixed overnight. I know I have to earn your trust. But I won't give up on this. I can't. I know I've made mistakes, but I'll keep trying. For him. And maybe for us too, one day." Sarah didn't say anything right away. She just looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. Then, with a small sigh, she spoke again. "I'll keep letting you see him. But don't think this means everything is okay. We're not going to pick up where we left off. But maybe we can find a new place to start, for his sake." John felt a rush of gratitude mixed with fear. He knew that this was the beginning of something fragile and uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like there was a glimmer of hope. As John left that night, he thought about the journey ahead. Rebuilding trust wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be a straight path, and there would be setbacks. But he was willing to face it, for Sarah, for their son, and for himself. The following weeks brought more moments of progress. John continued to show up at every school recital, every doctor's appointment, every small moment that made a difference in his son's life. He wasn't perfect, and he made plenty of mistakes along the way. But with each effort, he could see the relationship growing stronger. His son would come running into his arms, calling him Daddy, with a big smile, and that was all John needed to remind him why he was doing this. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah called John and asked him to meet her at the park with their son. It was a simple invitation, but the weight behind it wasn't lost on him. Was this another chance? Was Sarah opening up to the idea of them being a family again? When they met, Sarah handed John a small envelope. He opened it cautiously, unsure of what to expect. Inside was a birth certificate, his son's birth certificate. And there, in the box for father, was John's name. John froze for a moment, unable to fully comprehend what he was seeing. He had expected many things, but this was different. It was a simple piece of paper, but it was also a promise that no matter what had happened in the past, his place in their son's life was real. He was the father, and that meant something. "I thought you should know," Sarah said, her voice steady but emotional. "I never changed it. I didn't have to. He's always been your son, and I want you to be a part of his life. No more running away." Tears welled in John's eyes. This was more than he could have ever hoped for. This wasn't just forgiveness. It was a chance to build something new. It was a second chance, not just for him, but for their son too. John took a deep breath, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you down. I won't run away this time." Sarah gave him a small, tentative smile. "I know. I'm not expecting perfection, John. Just show up. Be here. That's all I need." And with that, John knew that his journey was far from over. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was finally on the right path, one that could lead to redemption, healing, and perhaps one day, a new beginning for him and Sarah. The months that followed felt like a steady climb for John. Every day he worked to prove himself not just to Sarah, but most importantly, to their son. The guilt that had once consumed him was still there, but it had slowly started to fade, replaced by something more constructive, a deep, unwavering determination to be a good father. He took his son to the park on Saturdays, helped with school projects, and spent evenings reading bedtime stories. With each moment, John felt a little more connected, not only to his son, but also to the family he thought he had lost forever. John's efforts didn't go unnoticed. Sarah observed how much he had changed, how hard he was trying to be present in their son's life. There were still moments when she felt the weight of what had happened, the memories of his abandonment, the hurt, the lies. But seeing John with their son slowly began to heal some of that pain. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was a start. Sarah couldn't deny the bond that was forming between father and son, and she couldn't ignore the quiet, steady way John was making amends. However, there were still days when Sarah couldn't shake the doubts. Could she really trust John again? Should she allow herself to hope for something more than just co-parenting? She had spent years building a life on her own, and the scars of her past with John still ran deep. But when she saw the way he looked at their son with so much love and regret in his eyes, She wondered if it was time to let go of the past. Maybe it was time to allow a future where the three of them could heal together. One evening, as John was putting their son to bed, Sarah stood in the doorway, watching them. Her heart swelled with emotions she hadn't expected. For a brief moment, it felt like the family they once were, before everything fell apart. The feeling was bittersweet, but it gave her a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. "Hey," Sarah said quietly, walking into the room after John had tucked their son in. "Can we talk for a minute?" John turned to her, his expression open but cautious. He had been waiting for this moment, the moment when Sarah would finally decide where they stood. He wasn't sure if it was going to be a conversation about the past or the future, but he knew it was important. "Of course," he said, his voice soft but steady. "What's on your mind?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before sitting down on the edge of the bed. She looked at John, her gaze lingering on him as if trying to read his thoughts. "I've been thinking," she started, "about everything we've been through, and about where we are now. It's been a long road, hasn't it?" John nodded, his throat tight. "I know I've messed up. I can't change what happened, but I'm trying to make it right. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Sarah smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "I can see that. And I've seen how much you've changed, how much you've put into being a father to him." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "I think we both know it's not going to be easy. Rebuilding trust takes time, and it's going to take a lot of effort, but I'm willing to try if you are." John felt a rush of relief wash over him. It wasn't a promise, not yet, but it was a chance, an opening, a way forward. He could feel his heart racing as he responded, "I'm ready, Sarah. I don't expect things to just go back to the way they were, but I'm willing to put in the work, however long it takes." Sarah's gaze dropped to her hands, and she took a deep breath before looking up again. "I know, but we can't undo the past. We can only move forward, and I need to know that you're committed to that, to making this work for all of us." John nodded again, his voice unwavering. "I am. I am committed to this. I'll be the father he deserves, and if you'll let me, I'll be there for you too. But I understand if you're not ready for that yet." Sarah's expression softened, but there was still a wariness in her eyes. "I'm not sure what this is going to look like, John, but I'm willing to see where it goes, for our son. Maybe for us too one day. But we'll take it one step at a time." John felt his chest tighten with emotion. He had no expectations, no illusions about what the future would hold, but for the first time in years, he felt like he had a chance, not just with his son, but with Sarah too. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight, but the possibility of something more was there, just out of reach. As Sarah stood up to leave the room, she turned to him one last time, her voice quieter now. "I'm glad you're back. I'm glad you're trying, but just remember, actions speak louder than words." John watched her leave, the weight of her words sinking in. He knew she was right. There was still so much to prove, so much to rebuild, but he was willing to fight for it, for them. He had a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. In the coming weeks, John made sure to keep proving his commitment. He didn't take any moment for granted. Every time he showed up for his son, every time he helped Sarah, he could see the walls slowly coming down, piece by piece. He didn't expect forgiveness to come easily, but each small act, each step forward, gave him hope. But one evening, as John sat alone in his apartment, reflecting on everything that had changed, a text message from Sarah came through. It was simple, but it stopped his heart. "I've been thinking about us. We've been through a lot, but maybe it's time for a new beginning. Let's try, John. For all of us." John smiled to himself, his heart full. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time he felt like he had a future, a real one, and this time he wasn't going to let it slip away. The following weeks were a quiet but significant turning point for John and Sarah. Their relationship, once shattered by betrayal, was now beginning to take shape again. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic confrontations, just small, consistent efforts that gradually began to rebuild the trust they had lost. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and for the first time, John could see that the future wasn't as uncertain as it once seemed. John had started spending more time with Sarah, not just as a father to their son, but as someone trying to be a friend, a partner, someone Sarah could rely on. They took small steps together, like having dinner as a family, attending their son's school events, and even doing simple things like grocery shopping together. The everyday moments that once seemed trivial were now imbued with a new meaning, a quiet understanding that they were both trying to heal, trying to move forward, trying to build something that was better than what they had before. John had stopped focusing on what he had lost. He had stopped regretting the past every minute of the day. Instead, he started to put his energy into making things right for his son. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when guilt would wash over him, when he would remember the pain he had caused, but he kept pushing forward. With each passing day, the distance between him and Sarah closed just a little more. The awkwardness began to fade, and slowly they started to talk again. Really talk, like they used to. They shared stories about their son, their hopes, and at times even laughed about the past, finding humor in their shared history. One evening, as they sat on the couch, their son nestled between them, Sarah looked at John with a soft smile. "It's been good, hasn't it?" she asked, her voice quiet but warm. John nodded, his heart swelling. "It has. I never thought we'd get here, but here we are." Sarah leaned back, her eyes distant for a moment. "I'm glad you're here, John, for him, for me. But I won't lie, it's still hard. I've been hurt so much, and I don't know if I can ever fully forget that." She turned to face him, her eyes steady. "But I do believe in second chances, and I think we're figuring this out." John felt a pang of emotion as he looked at her. "I know it's not easy. I know I can't erase the past. But I promise I'll keep showing up. Every day I'll keep trying. For him, for you, and for us." There was a long pause, and for a brief moment the weight of their shared history hung in the air. But it wasn't heavy in the same way it used to be. There was a quiet acceptance now, a recognition that they were both doing the best they could. "We'll take it one day at a time," Sarah finally said, her voice calm. "That's all we can do." John nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. This wasn't the end of their journey, it was just the beginning. But for the first time, he felt like they were on the right path, and that gave him hope. As the days turned into weeks, John's bond with his son continued to grow. He became more involved in his life, helping him with schoolwork, attending sports games, and simply spending time together. The more time they spent, the more John realized how much he had missed. He had been given a second chance, not just with his son, but with his own life, and he wasn't going to waste it. One Saturday, Sarah called John and asked if he would meet her at the park. They had plans for their son, but this time the invitation felt different. There was an unspoken tension, an anticipation that made John's heart race a little faster. What was this about? Were they taking another step forward, or were things about to change again? When John arrived at the park, he saw Sarah sitting on a bench watching their son play. She looked up as he approached, offering a small smile. But there was something in her eyes, something serious, something that made John pause. "John, I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady but soft, "about everything we've been through, about how far we've come." She took a deep breath, her fingers lightly tapping the bench. "And I think it's time to make things official, not just for our son, but for us too. I want to give us a real chance, John, a real chance to see if we can make this work." John's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. He had hoped for this, dreamed about it, but he wasn't sure he was ready to believe it could happen. Could they really start over after everything? I'm not saying it's going to be easy, Sarah continued, her gaze never leaving him. But I want to try. I don't want us to keep living in the past. We need to look ahead, and I think we're finally ready to do that. John swallowed hard, his emotions overwhelming him. He had waited for this moment, and now that it was here, he could barely find the words. He felt a mix of gratitude and disbelief, but most of all, he felt hope. Hope that they could find a way back to each other, not just for the sake of their son, but for themselves as well. "I'm ready," John finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've never been more ready." Sarah smiled, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was no hesitation in her eyes. "Let's take this one step at a time, John. But let's take it together." And for the first time in a long time, John truly believed that they could. The future was still uncertain, and there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Together, they would find their way. Together, they would rebuild what had been broken, and together, they would move forward. As the months passed, John and Sarah continued to take their relationship one day at a time. The scars of their past were still there, hidden beneath the surface, but they were no longer the defining factor in their lives. They were learning to let go of the weight that had once crushed them, and in doing so, they began to breathe again. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of tension, still times when old wounds resurfaced, but they faced those moments together with patience and understanding, determined to build a future instead of dwelling on the past. John became more involved with his son, and the bond between them grew stronger every day. He took his son to sports practices, helped him with homework, and even joined in on family outings. It was clear that their son was flourishing in ways John had never imagined. The boy was happy, confident, and healthy, and John took immense pride in being a part of that. He no longer felt like a stranger in his own child's life. He felt like a father, truly, for the first time. Sarah, too, began to soften toward John. There were still moments when her past pain resurfaced, times when she remembered the hurt and betrayal, but she was learning to let those feelings coexist with the healing that was happening. She no longer saw John as the man who abandoned her. She saw him as the man who was trying, who was there for their son, and who was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. It was a slow process, but the small moments of connection started to build into something deeper. One evening, as they sat together after putting their son to bed, Sarah spoke softly. "John," she began, her voice quiet but steady, "I know this hasn't been easy for either of us. I know you've been working hard to make up for the past. And I'm starting to see the man you've become, not just the man you were. It's been a journey, hasn't it?" John looked at her, his heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "It has been. I'm not perfect, Sarah. I know that. But I'm here. I'll always be here for you and him. I can't change what I did, but I can do everything in my power to make it right from here on out." Sarah smiled faintly, a soft warmth in her eyes. "I'm starting to believe that, slowly. But I'm starting to—" The words hung between them, not heavy with expectation, but with the quiet recognition that they were both opening up to something new. There was still work to be done, still obstacles to face, but they were facing them together. That was enough for now. One day, John came home from work and found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers in front of her. Her brow was furrowed in concentration as she scribbled notes on a legal pad. John noticed immediately that she seemed different, distracted, almost anxious. "Hey," he said gently, walking over to her, "what's going on?" Sarah looked up, her expression a mix of determination and concern. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began, her voice hesitant, "about us and about the future. And I've been wondering, maybe it's time to make this more official. I mean, we've been doing so well, and we're in a better place than we've ever been. But I think it's time to figure out what comes next. For us, as a family. What's next for our future?" John's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea where this conversation was going, but something in Sarah's voice told him it was important. "Sarah, what do you mean?" he asked, his voice steady, but unsure. She took a deep breath and pushed the papers toward him. "I've been looking into getting us legally recognized as a family, maybe even discussing the possibility of remarriage. It's not something I've taken lightly, but I think it's time we put the past behind us. I want us to move forward, and I think it's time we make it official. I know it's a big step, but I think we're ready." John sat down beside her, overwhelmed by the enormity of what she was saying. Remarriage. A second chance at a life they once dreamed of. His mind raced as he processed the thought. He hadn't been expecting this, but it felt right. It felt like the culmination of everything they had worked for, the forgiveness, the healing, the small steps toward a new beginning. "I didn't know you were thinking about that," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm ready, Sarah. I'm ready for whatever comes next. I've been ready for a long time. I never stopped loving you. I just couldn't find my way back. But I see it now. I see what we can be, what we already are, and I want to build on that." Sarah smiled, her eyes filled with a softness that spoke volumes. "I know, I feel the same way. I think we've come a long way, and this is our next step. But it's not just about marriage, John. It's about the trust we've built, the family we've made. I want us to continue building that together." John nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. He wasn't sure when it had happened, but he realized that the pain of the past was finally starting to fade, replaced by the hope of a future they could build together. This wasn't about fixing everything. It was about moving forward, about being present for each other and for their son. As they sat together at the table, discussing their plans, John couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude. He had been given a second chance, one that he didn't deserve, but one that he would work tirelessly to prove was worth it. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but they were no longer walking it alone. They had each other, and that was enough. For the first time in a long time, John felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Months went by, and the changes in John and Sarah's life became more and more evident. The commitment they had both made to rebuilding their family was no longer just words, it was in their actions. Every day they took small steps forward, from simple routines like cooking dinner together to more meaningful moments like attending therapy sessions as a couple. There were still difficult days, moments when the past would knock on the door of their hearts, reminding them of the pain they had endured. But those moments were fewer, and they learned how to handle them together. Sarah found herself trusting John again in ways she hadn't thought possible. She saw how much he had changed, and she slowly allowed herself to hope for the future. One evening, after they had put their son to bed, John and Sarah sat on the couch, just the two of them, with no distractions. It was quiet, comfortable, something they hadn't had in years. Sarah turned to John, her eyes reflecting a mixture of appreciation and thoughtfulness. "Do you remember when we used to talk about the future?" she asked softly, almost as if she were testing the waters. John looked at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, I do. I used to think it was all so clear, that we had everything planned out." Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor for a moment, as she processed the memory. "And then everything changed. We had to let go of those plans, didn't we? I thought we'd lost everything, but now I don't feel that way anymore." John felt a surge of warmth in his chest as he reached for her hand. "I know. I think that's the thing I've learned most of all. Things don't always turn out the way we plan, but that doesn't mean they can't turn out better than we ever imagined." Sarah squeezed his hand, her voice a little steadier now. "I think we're living proof of that. We've been through so much, John, so much hurt. But we've come out the other side, and now I can't help but think, maybe this is the beginning of something even better." John's heart skipped a beat at her words. It was the first time she had openly spoken about a future together, about a life beyond their past mistakes. "Maybe it is," he said softly. "Maybe it is." They sat in silence for a while, just being in each other's presence. For the first time in a long time, it felt like the weight of their past no longer had control over them. They had worked through the pain, faced the mistakes, and now they were moving forward, together. As Sarah and John continued to build their future, they decided it was time to take the next step. Their son had started to thrive in ways they hadn't expected, and seeing his joy and growth brought both of them a sense of pride. He had grown used to having John around, and their bond was becoming undeniable. But there was one more thing they wanted to solidify, something that would show their son and each other that they were fully committed to this new chapter of their lives. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Sarah took John's hand as they sat together on the couch. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice a little nervous but hopeful. "Maybe it's time we take that final step. Maybe we should get married." John's heart stopped for a moment. He had always dreamed of this, but he had never imagined it would come so soon. He had thought that maybe, just maybe, Sarah would need more time. But there she was, looking at him with a softness in her eyes that made him feel like he had been given everything he could ever want. Sarah," he started, his voice trembling slightly. "I've wanted this for so long, but I also didn't want to rush you. I didn't want you to feel like you had to. You know that, right?" Sarah smiled warmly, her eyes sparkling. "I know, and I don't think it's rushing. I think it's just the next step in our journey. We've been through so much, and we've come out the other side. Together." John nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "I can't believe we're here, after everything. I can't believe we're really here. You've given me a second chance I don't deserve, and I promise I'll never take it for granted." Sarah leaned in and kissed him softly, her lips lingering on his for a moment. "I know. I trust you. And I'm ready for this. For us." That night they talked for hours, planning what their wedding might look like, imagining their future together. It was a quiet, simple moment, a far cry from the whirlwind of their past, but it was exactly what they both needed. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about commitment. It was about love. And for the first time in a long time, they both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family. The wedding day arrived with the calm and simplicity that Sarah and John had envisioned. It wasn't a grand affair, but it was everything they needed, just their closest friends and family gathered together in a small, beautiful park where they had often spent time during their journey back to each other. John stood at the altar, his heart racing, as he waited for Sarah to walk down the aisle. He could feel the nerves in his chest, but they were mixed with something else, something he hadn't felt in years, pure happiness. As Sarah walked down the aisle, their son by her side, John's breath caught in his throat. She looked beautiful, more beautiful than he had ever remembered. The years had been tough on them, but they had shaped them into the people they were today, people who knew the value of love, of second chances, and of family. When Sarah reached him at the altar, they shared a quiet smile, their eyes filled with the weight of everything they had been through and everything they had built together. Their son stood between them, holding their hands, a symbol of the future they were now creating. The ceremony was simple, just vows spoken from the heart. When John spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I promise to be there for you and our son every day. I will love you with everything I have, through the good times and the tough times. And I will never take you for granted again." Sarah's voice trembled as she spoke her vows. "I promise to love you, to trust you, and to walk beside you in everything. We've been through so much, but I know that together we can face whatever comes our way. I'm so thankful for this second chance, for you, for us." As they exchanged rings, John felt a sense of peace settle over him. The past no longer defined them. This moment, this was their new beginning. When the ceremony ended, they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, A kiss that was full of promise, full of love, and full of hope for the future. The days following their wedding were filled with love, laughter, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude. John and Sarah spent their days enjoying each other's company, cherishing the moments that had once seemed so out of reach. Their son, now fully part of their new life, thrived in the warmth of their love. He had become the center of their world, a constant reminder of the life they had fought so hard to rebuild. They spent weekends hiking in the woods, taking family trips, and enjoying simple, quiet nights at home. Every moment together was precious, a gift they had earned. Sarah and John's bond grew stronger every day, and they both found themselves rediscovering the love they once had. It wasn't perfect, life never was, but it was real, and it was enough. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Sarah turned to John, her smile reflecting the peace she had found. "I can't believe we're here," she said softly. "After everything, we're here." John smiled back, his heart full. "I know. It feels like a dream, but it's real, and I wouldn't change a thing." As they sat there, hands entwined, looking out at the horizon, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with each other, with their son, and with the unwavering commitment to never let go of the second chance they had been given. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, John and Sarah didn't need to know what would come next. They had each other, and that was all they needed to move forward, together. As the years passed, John and Sarah's relationship continued to grow, anchored in the trust they had rebuilt and the love they had worked so hard to cultivate. Their life, once filled with uncertainty and pain, had now transformed into something stable, something beautiful. The lessons they had learned were woven into the fabric of their everyday lives. They had learned that love wasn't just about the good times, it was about showing up during the hard times, about facing challenges together, and about understanding that mistakes were part of being human. The past would always be a part of them, but it no longer controlled them. John spent every day being the father he had always wanted to be. He was present, physically, emotionally, and mentally. He no longer felt like an outsider in his own family. He was fully integrated into their son's life, and that relationship was as strong as ever. Their son was thriving, his laughter filling their home every day, and his confidence was a reflection of the love and stability he now had in his life. The boy's smile, his hugs, the way he would turn to John with excitement for every new adventure, they were the greatest gift John could have ever asked for. Sarah, too, had found a sense of peace that she hadn't thought was possible after everything. She had learned to trust John again, not just as the father of her child, but as her partner. The years had given them both the space to heal, to forgive, and to love again. Sarah found herself reflecting on their journey, how far they had come, how much they had fought for each other and for their family. There were still moments when the weight of their past would